Okay. All right.
Hi,
Hello, Pilar. How are you?
I'm fine. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely fine. Time for another space capsule. So this is a space capsule on fairy tales. So Pilar, this is kind of a sample of some of the so people will have noticed that there were several potential fairy tale modules there, and those were suggested by Pilar. So you could tell us a little bit about your modules, but of course we want to do our discussion here as well. I think I've got Sarah again in a different place here. Okay, let's bring Sarah in a second time, or maybe it's the first time. Okay, go ahead.
But Sharon is saying that there's no sound on Twitch. Okay.
Okay, sorry. Hang on. Okay, I will try to. What is the problem here? Here, wait. Could you speak again, Pilar?
Yeah. Can I just go and
Okay.
begin?
I think we should have. Yeah. We have sound okay. We're good.
Okay. So here we go. So first of all, hi from Brazil. I'm from Colombia. I live in Brasilia, Brazil, and I'm happy to be able to share my passion for fairy tales. I'm just going to begin with a little anecdote about my life, and it is I can't remember a single moment in my life in which I wasn't reading fairy tales. I have been traveling around Latin America for the last years, and I have here always my fairy tale books with me. These are from when I was 5 years old, and I can't part with them. Look, they're really battered copies, but I love them. And I continued reading fairy tales because, like Tolkien, I believe that they're not especially for children; they are for everybody. And I would like to share this in my space modules with you. And without further ado, I'm just going to share my screen with you so that you can see. I need.
Yeah,
you need to let me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Zoom has been unfriendly.
You're muted, Corey, in
Zoom.
Regard.
Yeah, we can hear you, Corey.
I am. Okay. Right. So, yeah. So, I know you can hear me on Twitch, but you can't hear me here. So anyway, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. We're Zoom is being unfriendly in that regard.
Okay.
Even inhospitable, I'm afraid. I've attempted and failed. That seems to be like some global setting that got done wrong. I'm still like junior varsity there. But what we could do, Pilar, we could do the same thing we did with Sparrow. If you have slides and could send them to me quick, then I can show them on my screen and then people can see them. Not as good.
Okay, I'll send them to Slack, maybe better,
that'd be great.
quicker.
Perfect.
Let me just give me a minute, and let me just find that.
The joys of technology.
Right.
You know, there are always curveballs. Definitely always curveballs here, and especially since I'm just kind of getting adjusted to Zoom.
You will get used to it.
That doesn't mean. Yeah.
Okay, Corey, I just sent you the presentation.
Doesn't mean it's going to cease to be annoying. Okay, I see that. All right, and I am.
Says the man who teaches and who has founded an online university.
And hates Zoom.
I'm just saying, I'm not a lover of this platform. That's all I'm saying.
What's funny is that this is one of the easiest programs for a blind person to use.
And that's one of the things that I like most about it. And one of the reasons why, we are very seriously working on shifting to it. But it has many other less pleasant qualities. Okay, I have got it.
Okay.
And I am about to fix one thing here. And I've got it. Boom. Wham. Here we are.
Yay.
Okay. So I'll put it here. So there we go. All right. So you can just tell me to next slide. It'll be just like the old days when Tom Shippey used to do that. That was so much fun.
Right. Great. So you need to share your screen so that we can see the presentation, right?
Okay. No, what you can do is you can see it on Twitch.
Oh,
So we can.
But
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
have Twitch.
You don't have Twitch? Okay.
No.
No problem. I can. Well. All right. Sure. I'll do that for you. I'll do that for you, and it's gonna change the student experience here, but that's okay. We've seen that in a bunch of other places. Maybe I can.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so now I can see the presentation, so that's great. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to give you a taste of what it is like to take a module with me on fairy tales. So I use a lot of visual images because fairy tales are about images and the images that we can build in our minds, and they are fantastic. So please go to the next slide because I have a couple of questions for you. And I just want to ask you if you recognize any of these fairy tales that I have here.
Okay. Let's
Translation, please.
Yeah. Well, they're a bunch of pictures, so you have to bear with us for a second, Cecilia.
Okay.
We'll describe them after we guess. Okay. So there's one with a blonde woman with very long hair. So I'm gonna guess that that's Rapunzel.
That's what I would
Right.
guess.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's perfect. What else can you see there that you
There's a
instantly
picture of-
recognize?
There's
Yeah.
a picture of what looks like somebody with a crown, and he has nothing but a pair of tighty whities on. So
Yeah,
I'm guessing that's the Emperor's new clothes.
absolutely. You are
Oh.
right. Yes.
Okay.
Anything else that you can see there that you like? or you
Wait! I
recognize?
see a suspiciously red hood over there on that girl
Oh.
next to the wolf.
Yeah.
So, though amusingly, she seems to have just a hood, like no cape or anything. It's just a little cap
Yeah.
that she's wearing, but it is red, and she has a little basket. Though it's interesting that she's strolling along in a companionable fashion with the wolf right there, which is not quite what I would have
Yeah.
expected. But I gotta guess Red Riding Hood there. Okay.
Absolutely, and because before in some versions of the story she's called Little Red Cap. So
Right.
Little Red Cap. Okay.
yes,
Ah.
exactly.
I would imagine that's what the translation caperucita, like that would be a little is that little red cap in
Right.
Spanish?
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. You got
Surprised.
it.
Louise.
Surprised there was
Because
nothing.
I used a lot of fairy tales when teaching Spanish to second graders last year, and Caperucita Roja was one of them.
I wondered
Right.
where the word why the word rojo was not in there.
Roja means red, so I
Yeah.
don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Caperucito.
Caperucita Roja.
Yeah, sometimes it's La Caperucita, sometimes it's La Caperucita Roja,
Or just Caperucita.
or
Yeah.
just Caperucita, right?
What other stories do you think you recognize? This is definitely Little Red Riding Hood. And what about the others?
If I were to, oops, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say, is picture D the Little Mermaid? Because I can see a mermaid in the picture.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's it.
And she seems to be picking sea anemones as if she were picking flowers, which sort of suggests that she's fantasizing perhaps about a terrestrial existence, right?
Because she loved her own garden, and her own garden didn't have any flowers, but she had all the marine,
Right.
corals and things like that.
I bet
What
the sea
about-
anemones didn't enjoy that one little bit. But anyway, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
What about C? Do you know C?
See, in the image, there's a donkey and a dog on top of a donkey, and a cat on top of the dog, and a rooster on top of the cat. Is that?
So
Go ahead, Cecilia.
the first one that came to my mind was the little red hen, but there's no hen in that.
No,
There's no
it's
It's
a
a
rooster.
rooster.
Yeah.
It definitely looks like a
Is
rooster,
it-
yeah.
The Brementown musicians or the Brementown
Yes.
players.
Yes,
Oh,
Elise.
I don't
These
know
are
that
the
story.
Dude, I don't know that one either.
The
That's
Bremen
that's a
musicians.
rare one, and I only remember it because I just happened to peek through to my own fairy tale book.
Right. The story is fantastic. It's all about music and how the music of these animals scares some thieves away. And you can imagine the donkey and the dog and the cat meowing and the rooster doing their sounds at the same time. So that's basically the plot of the tale. What about G?
Okay, G, we have what looks like a wolf on his back legs,
Yeah.
bursting in a green door, and a bunch of young goats scattering all over the place, knocking over furniture and looking quite alarmed.
Yeah.
Okay,
So- So this is The Wolf and the Seven Kids. This is
Mhm.
from the Grimm Brothers collection. And any ideas or thoughts on H?
Okay.
It's a golden statue with there's a bird whispering into
crown.
on his crown.
Yeah.
Is that one of Oscar Wilde's fairy tales?
Yes,
I can't
it
remember
is.
the title of it though.
It is The Happy Prince by
The
Oscar
Happy
Wilde.
Prince.
I
Yes.
don't know his
Wow.
stories.
Oh, they're wonderful.
I'll have to look them up.
They are beautiful. And what I did here in this slide is I put a lot of fairy tales. All of them are fairy tales. We have some collected by the Grimm brothers, like Rapunzel, B, C, and G, and E, of course. And also I have another layer of fairy tales, which are the literary fairy tales, which are those by Andersen, A and D, and Oscar Wilde's, which are really elaborate. And I also put F is a Russian fairy tale that has many versions in, it has a version in Norway and in Finland, and it's called the Frog Queen. It's also known as the Mouse Queen, and it's a folk tale, fairy tale. There are different versions from Russia. So
You didn't
What
put
am-
my favorite one in there.
what is your favorite one?
Beauty and the Beast.
It is beautiful. Yes,
Oh, my
absolutely.
favorite.
So what I'm doing
Thanks,
here is I'm
Celia.
showing that there are two different kinds of fairy tales. Those that are fairy tales per se, that have many different versions throughout the world, and you can find like Little Red Riding Hood around the world, and the Russian fairy tale as well. And then you have the more specific ones, really with elaborate vocabulary and imagery, like Andersen's and Oscar Wilde's. Next slide, please. So I put here my own opinions, and I'm wondering about yours. Why do you like fairy tales? For me, all of these reasons here are some of my reasons. I don't know if you agree, if you have other reasons. The first one I wrote was, they remind me of my childhood, of course. And then I go to they have beautiful images and everything is possible. They contain profound universal themes, and in the stories, good always prevails over evil. And they have many layers, so you can interpret them in many, many different ways, and this is part of the appeal. They're really timeless. So what about you? Why do you like fairy tales?
I quite like
Oh,
the darkness that's in some of them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Darkness.
Absolutely. There's a lot of darkness.
Particularly the Grimm fairy tales, some of them are really dark.
Yes.
Yes.
And I like that.
Yes.
I find that really interesting, how they're exploring some really scary elements through fairy tales for, well, I suppose meant for children, but still they're kind of cautionary, maybe because of it.
Yep. Absolutely. And we have to think that the Grimm brothers, they sanitized many of these tales. So when you find, like I have here my copy of the Brother Grimms, that they're shocking. There's incest, there's horrible, brutal violence in some of the tales, and yet they were sanitized for children when they collected them. But yeah, darkness is a very strong and important part of fairy tales. I agree with you. Anything else?
One of the things I've always loved about fairy tales is the sort of the combination of how, on the one hand, it's a combination of like traditional and expected patterns of story, right? All the way from, once upon a time till they lived happily ever after, right? And yet at the same time, like surprises, right? Things just like the craziest weirdest things happen in fairy tales. So on the one hand, you have this really like the sense of timelessness, right? Of the patterns of the stories, and yet like they're always surprising. Even if you've read them before, I'm still surprised when I reread many of these stories.
Absolutely.
And that combination, I find just really fascinating and refreshing.
And this is one of the once upon a time function. Once upon a time is timeless. You never know when it happened. It happened somewhere in the past. It can be yesterday. It can be 200 years ago, and they're still up to date. Let's say that. So let's go to the next slide.
Because may I speak for just a moment?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that I love about fairy tales is that, again, the escape, recovery, consolation. When I read fairy tales, I am not Cecilia. I am the good queen or the princess who is trying to make something good happen. Things in my life that I know will never happen in fairy tales, and I'm a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I say here, everything is possible. And there are some stories, particularly in Andersen, that have sad endings, not the Disney-fied ending that we saw in the movie. The Little Mermaid dies at the end of the story. She becomes an air spirit, which is a little bit of hope. Oscar Wilde's stories are really, really sad. And they don't have these happy endings that we expect from every fairy tale. But yes, everything is possible. And I think one of the best things for me is the imagery, the images that come to your mind, because everything is possible. So let's go to the next slide, because I want to discuss with you the definition of fairy tale. What is a fairy tale? I have two definitions here. Let's read the first one. Go ahead, Corey. This is from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. A story as for children involving fantastic forces and beings such as fairies, wizards, and goblins. So we know what Tolkien would say about this definition. What do you think about this definition?
Right away, yeah, I noticed that the parenthetical "as for children," a story, as like the tradition was that it was told by the fire or by at bedtime to either settle a child to go to sleep or to entertain children. But it's also it was also it could be the storytelling could be a community event. So women working together during the quilting bee or during a festival, or this very, even though they're marketed for children, and we know Tolkien would heartily disagree with that. It was more of a community effort, and it was more of a way to bind cultures together. Every culture has its own interpretations of these universal themes, as you said, Pilar.
Yeah, that's that. What you're saying is exactly that, and they originally weren't labeled for children. Even Andersen's tales were very, very popular, and Oscar Wilde's tales were very popular as well, especially the first volume. The second one, not as much, but they were for everybody, and people would read them together. And even before the 1800s, fairy tales were for everybody. So yeah, I don't really agree with this one. Let's see what Maria Tatar, a very famous scholar on folklore and fairy tale, says about that. Take a story, turn it into something larger than life, add a touch of magic, let it simmer for a few centuries, and presto, you have a fairy tale. So what do you think about this one?
I like that.
Right? Very nice.
Truly,
I especially like the simmering, again, which of course is explicitly invoking the same image that Tolkien uses in the Cauldron of Story, right?
Yes.
But that idea that, because that does seem an intrinsic part of it, right? I mean, if it's not built with the stock of long traditions, it's not the same, right? I mean, you can write a story, a new story, which is like a fairy tale, and it will partake of that stock in some ways, that you yourself have, kind of, brought in and used. But I agree that element does seem to be a really crucial one.
The oral transmission of the stories too. I mean, the 16, 17, 1800s, they were passed down from century to century, and when they didn't have writing or other things like that, they told those stories again and again.
Yeah. And something that I like about fairy tales, and there is this Italian author called Italo Calvino. He used to say that every culture appropriates the story and puts something from them. Like, even if it is a little touch, like a recipe or a cultural trait or something in the landscape that belongs to that particular culture, so that they belong to everybody. And that's why they're spread all over, and we find all over and all over the same plot. So, yeah.
And to your point, Cecilia, that it is an oral transmission, because 16th early storytelling, if you was we didn't have the printing press, and so so books and paper and reading was a very privileged act. You had to literally be taught how to do it, and you only had access to that education if you were rich. Whereas the oral tradition and the oral storytelling was not only universal, but also specifically for the working class, because that was a way they could share story without needing to read it, and bringing the community together.
And fairy tales also, they combine superstitions and ideas from the Bible or pagan ideas as well, and they blend into the story, so they become a part of that culture and that specific community. So
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. So here we have some essential characteristics of a fairy tale. So just click once. There are many different versions of them, but the main plot remains. So we have a Cinderella story from China, in which there was a evil stepmother, but somehow there are some cultural elements, but the plot is exactly the same. We have the stepsisters and the prince and a lost, it is in a glass slipper, it's a kind of slipper, shoe or something, but it has to do with a shoe. And so there is the same plot, even though details may vary. Yes? Go ahead, Corey. Magic is natural. And this is good for Tolkien. This fits Tolkien. We expect magic to happen. We don't need explanations. We don't need to have why this is happening. This is a world in which magic is allowed and it happens, and therefore, Corey, the laws of magic are inviolable. If you have a spell, or if you have, for instance, here Snow White, she will not wake up unless the prince kisses her, or the poisoned apple is removed from, the bite is removed from her throat. So they are inviolable in every single story. Go ahead, Corey. The world of fairy tales resembles that of ancient legends. So that this is what we were saying before. They are connected to communities, to traditions, superstitions. So they go back in time, and they are blended into current events and all that. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No problem there. So basically, we have a very basic plot that can be defined into three parts. We have separation, initiation, and return. So we have separation from the main character, and something happens, and then we have usually a coming of age story is typical, and then the hero returns back home, and this is like a regular plot. We have some other elements. Typical themes are coming of age, daunting tasks. Usually we have a number 3, so you have to do 3. We have 3 princes, we have 3 things, 3 stones, 3 something. There is conflict between parents and children. the restoration of justice is very important, and usually we have marriage. That's not always the case, but these are common elements in fairy tales. And I think we have one more. They are timeless, which is what we were saying. Is there any other thing that you would add to this list?
I also notice when I read some fairy tales, the number 7 comes up a lot in grids as well. Just there usually are like 3 tasks or 3 to go with that basic plot, or even what Sparrow was referencing in her class, the in the 3-part structure that you find in the Great British Baking Show, the three trials. But the number 7, I noticed, like the 7 brothers, or the 7th son of a 7th son. This notion of numbers being magic.
Yeah, I like very much D.L. Ashleyman. He says that 7 symbolizes completeness. It is derived from the 7 days of creation and the 7 planets of Greek antiquity. We also have 12, which has a special meaning from the apostles. And of course, we know 13 brings some balance. So yes, 7, I think, is also recurrent. So these are in general fairy tales, but I also talked about literary fairy tales. And they are a bit different from traditional fairy tales. Go ahead, Corey. And they are different because they have an author that we can identify. So for instance, this image that I have here is from The Snow Queen, and The Snow Queen was written by Andersen. So we know who the author was. So in the case of The Happy Prince, we know Oscar Wilde wrote that one. In the case of Little Red Riding Hood, we have Perrault's version, we have the Grimm's collected version, but there isn't a specific author because there are many variations of the story. Corey. They can be based on a folk tale, but the author creates significant or some parts of the plot, adding details that might modify. Andersen was famous at the beginning for working with folk tales and adding his own touches, and then he started writing his own literary fairy tales. And I think the most important part is this one. The language reflects the author's unique voice and is usually more aesthetically refined than in traditional fairy tales. So, of course, we have beautiful images in traditional fairy tales and elaborate language, but here we have specific voices, and we're going to see some samples of that next. And I think there's one more, and they are committed to print. Unlike traditional fairy tales, which, as Elise was saying, they pass from generation to generation or from community to community. These are committed to print. They were published, and we can identify them as printed work. Yeah. Go ahead. So here I have 3 short fragments, and let's work together and find which of these belong to a fairy tale, traditional, or from a literary fairy tale. And here comes the first one.
Okay, so the first one, we've got a picture of 2 rosy-cheeked children eating large pastries next to a gingerbread house.
So go ahead
Very
and click.
difficult.
And you're going to find the fragment there, the text, if you click. Right. So let's go ahead and I don't know if one of you wants to read this part.
On the 3rd day, they walked until midday, when they came to a little house built entirely from bread, with the roof made of cake, and the windows were made of clear sugar.
Okay, so first of all, I love this scene because we never question, why is there a house made of all this? Why doesn't it spoil? Why is it always like that? Okay, because it is, because magic is natural, because why not? Because this is a fairy tale. And if we compare this little fragment with the next one, Corey. Okay, go ahead. I don't know if Sarah wants to read it.
Yeah, sure. Now then, we will begin. When the story is done, you shall know a great deal more than you do now. He was a terribly bad hobgoblin, a goblin of the very wickedest sort. And, in fact, he was the devil himself.
Right. So we have two fragments of two stories. It doesn't matter if you know the stories or not, but let's talk about the language. What do you find in the first one? What is it about language? Is there something that catches your attention or not
It
really?
was simpler.
Exactly. It is simpler. And what do you find in the second one that is not so simple?
There's a very sorry.
No, go ahead, Elise. Go ahead.
There's a very definitive voice. Like I could almost hear it as a parent saying this to, like, hey, we will begin. When the story is done, using the use of second person, we will begin. You shall know a great deal more than you do now, or you do know. It's a conversation. It's not. It's not simply passing down the story. It's either maybe a parent or a teacher chatting with the child that they're telling the story to.
Exactly. So we have the implied reader is involved here. We want everybody to get involved here, and there is a specific voice. This part, now then we will begin, is the beginning of The Snow Queen by Andersen. And Andersen was known for his very, very specific voice. He was very straightforward, and at the same time, he wanted to involve his readers, and he uses beautiful imagery, but he, in Danish, they were annoyed because he used very colloquial language, and he wrote as he spoke. And this was a big deal at the time. He was breaking from that. And Corey, are you looking at the time?
Yes.
Let's just finish the slide and we'll finish, okay?
That's great.
So yeah, this one, the second paragraph belongs to a literary fairy tales, while the first one is from a traditional fairy tale. And just the last paragraph, and we'll finish here. Go ahead, Corey, and read it.
I am waited for in Egypt, said the swallow. My friends are flying up and down the Nile and talking to the large lotus flowers. Soon they will go to sleep in the tomb of the great king. The king is there himself in his painted coffin. He is wrapped in yellow linen and embalmed with spices. Round his neck is a chain of pale green jade, and his hands are like withered leaves.
Okay, so what do you think, very quickly, about the language here?
It's third person. It's a character speaking to someone else.
Right.
And it's very descriptive.
Very descriptive. And it's talking about rather exotic things, if you agree with me, like the tomb of the great king, and spices, and pale green jade, and hands wither leaves. So yeah, this is from The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde. Very elaborate. He loved Orientalism at the time. The Orient was fantastic for him, so he is full of these images. So here you have a taste of what it is to take a module with me on fairy tales. So
excellent.
I want to.
Wonderful. Yeah. And so you're doing you're offering your module on the Oscar Wilde's fairy tales and Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Japanese children's stories as well.
Yes, I forgot to mention that. Japanese fairy tales and the connection of Japanese fairy tales and specific cultural elements from the Japanese culture. So,
awesome.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Very good.
Muchísimas
Very
gracias, I would say.
No,
Thank you so much.
Ciao.